Yo, let's go, and welcome to the video. The question I've still been seeing a lot is the Moonfire badge idol worth it? Do we use it? And the answer is yes. So grab your 20 badges of justice, buy this from the vendor, and since I'm on the PTR, I will use a test dummy to show you how we're going to use it. So real quickly, the idol proc gives you 140 spell power for 10 seconds, so depending on how much haste you have at that time, or if it's during lust, or heroism, or Quag's Eye proc, you're going to be getting about 4 to 5 Starfire casts off with that bonus 140 spell power. This has no internal cooldown, so if you put it on, you start spamming it and see proc right on the first one there. And it refreshed itself after a couple. But depending on which the other idols you prefer, the Moongoddess for the Starfire or the Raven Goddess for your raid group having a little extra crit, you can just change that out in your macro for Moonfire. But since I always wear Moongoddess on bosses, I have my macro set up for that one. So swapping idols will trigger a global cooldown. So at the start of the fight, we want to have the Unseen Moon idol on. So when we Faerie Fire and Moonfire, we're gonna get that proc, and it's gonna switch to the other idol that we want to have for the rest of the fight. So that's step one. That's the easiest step, and even that will take a little while to get a feel for, because if you're spamming the macro, then it's probably not gonna work. It's going to take an extra global cooldown to get that Moonfire off, and we don't want to lose DPS by taking 2 global cooldowns to swap the idol and cast Moonfire. So I really need to catch up with the New Age Raiders and get some weak auras going so I can see my global cooldown in the middle of my screen instead of having to stare down at my cast bar. Because the way to reliably swap this with this macro is to Faerie Fire and then wait for that global cooldown to come all the way around, and then you hit your macro. So you Faerie Fire, wait for it to go completely off, and then you hit it. So there's going to be the slightest delay, less than 1/10 of a second if you're able to see your global cooldown by having it with a weak aura or something like that. But I think having this proc for the next 4 to 5 Starfires is worth that little tiny bit of delay that you're going to have in your casts. So once you already have your main idol for the rest of the fight on, you can spam this macro. It's not going to give you that delay anymore since the idol's already equipped. So it's not like you have to time it perfectly every single time you cast your Moonfire. It's only when the Moonfire is going to be idol swapping. So another thing to point out really quickly is the idol swap global cooldown will always be 1.5 seconds. So if you have haste on your gear, or if it's during drums or bloodlust or heroism, this isn't going to benefit from all of that haste. So you could be losing another 1/4 of a second by doing this, but at the beginning of the fight, usually you might have drums up, but you're not going to have lust really at the very beginning of a pool. It's going to be 5-10 seconds into the fight, so that little bit of a delay shouldn't really be that bad. Also at the beginning of the fight, if you're a huge fan of the Raven Goddess, your warlocks are putting up dots, they're putting up their curses, so them not having this for your first 2 globals while you're Faerie Firing into your Moonfire shouldn't affect their DPS at all. Now step 2 is where another macro is going to come in, and I've built one for Insect Swarm and Faerie Fire. So what this is going to do is, if we already have our main idol on and I hit my Insect Swarm to move during a fight or something, it's just going to use Insect Swarm and not do anything else. But if I hold down my Alt key as a modifier, so instead of 4 for Insect Swarm, if I hold Alt and then 4, while I start to run or whatever, then it's going to Insect Swarm and Idol Swap. That's not to say that every single Insect Swarm that you do while you move, you want to be switching. So it's really only if you're casting and your Moonfire is about to fall off and you have to run, then you can swap your idol back on, and then when you Moonfire, it's going to swap the Moonfire idol back on. So since you're using 2 global cooldown spells back to back, you can swap to the Moonfire with your Insect Swarm or Faerie Fire, and then swap back from your Moonfire idol to your Crit or Starfire idol on your next Moonfire after you're done moving. So if you're in your rotation and your Faerie Fire and Moonfire are about to fall off at the same time, this is when you can use your Faerie Fire to idol swap and then reapply your Moonfire to go back to your other idol that you use. This is trickier than starting off the fight with Faerie Fire and Moonfiring. Same goes for Insect Swarm. If you decide that you're going to move and swap your idol and you're casting a Starfire, if you try to move and then swap it, you have to wait for that Starfire cast to end, and it doesn't end immediately as soon as you start to move. Like if you hit it at the same time as you start to move, then it's going to mess up, and just swap the idol and not put up the insect swarm. So if we're in the middle of our rotation when you have to move and you want to use the insect swarm to swap the idol back, if you do it too soon, it's not going to swap it. You have to stop for a second, wait for that cast to end, and then use it. But if you're able to wait until the end of the Starfire before you move, then it should swap without an issue since the cast is over with. So I don't think your standard raider is going to be doing stuff like this. It takes a lot of practice, a lot of getting used to. I'm still getting used to it. Even with this being my third video on it, I'm still finding new ways to try to have more uptime with this idol. I'm going to start off slow and only do it during the beginning of the fight, and then on bosses like ROS and Illidan where there's long transition phases, I'll pop it back on in between phase, and it'll be just like doing the start of the fight again. Faerie Fire, Moonfire, and then going into the rotation. And once I get comfortable with that, and I have some weak auras going, and it's easier to see my cooldowns, global cooldowns of all these dots and stuff, that's when I might start using the Insect Swarm Faerie Fire macros to really start pushing the DPS limits for myself. There's many ways that this can mess up if you're mashing the macros by hitting the modified version on accident and losing out on global cooldowns and stuff like that in the middle of the fight. But I think the benefit is going to outweigh that once you get used to it. You shouldn't be messing up after you've been doing this for a while. So hopefully this reflects on my logs and I see my DPS go up. I'll put these 3 macros in the description of the video, but you're only going to be able to see them if you're subscribed. I'm only kidding. You can see these down in the description, subscribed or not. I've got a big channel in my Discord for idol swapping where I go through different situations for each boss, like Anatheron, Khazragal, every single boss in Black Temple and Hyjal, when I'm going to be using which idol on which fight. So even if you want to join the Discord, read this and then leave the Discord, that's cool. But the link for the Discord will be in the description as well. And huge shout out to Fox over on Wooey's Discord. If you played Moonkin in Classic, you definitely know who Wooey is. So shout out to the homie. I was hoping that there was some sort of macro like this, and thanks to them for bringing this up. So if you start trying this idol swapping and you're having any issues, reach out to me on Discord, leave a comment down below in this video. I'll reply to either one. And thanks for watching.